Welcome to the newest episode of the Caucus Corner. Each week, we bring together legislators and New Yorkers to discuss some of our more pressing issues from the perspective of people of color in New York. I'm your host today, Assemblymember Steve Varaga. I'm the chaplain of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. I'm the first special guest host of the podcast. So please listen, please share, please like, because I don't want it to be my last. So come on, we gotta let's spread the word on how amazing our podcasts are. And today, as we make our way through 2025, during our ledge session, we're day by day, week by week, month by month, the lines are blurring. Time is more theoretical now, but we are still continuing to look at ways to uplift the people that are struggling in our communities just to make ends meet. So for some in New York, it feels impossible to hear that there's actually a booming tech industry across our state. But according to a study from Tech NYC, employment in the tech industry has grown by 160% over the last 15 years across all 5 boroughs. This is pretty serious contrast to the rest of the country overall, which has seen only an increase in 54%. So despite this boom that we've seen, people aren't necessarily finding the way to develop the skills they need to make their way into this lucrative industry. That's why today's episode, today we're focused on the Good Jobs Guarantee Act. Which will put individuals on a path forward to finding a good paying job that they're qualified for. And I'm not going to get into the details. I'm not going to get into the sauce and the secrets just yet, because I want to introduce our two fantastic guests that are going to do that for us. We have Assemblywoman Neely Rosick and, of course, Andrew from Pursuit, who's in charge of strategic partnerships and operations there.
Well, thanks for having me back on the Caucus Corner. It's great to be talking about another issue I care deeply about. For those tuning in, I'm Assemblywoman Neely Rosick. I represent the 25th Assembly District, which is parts of Eastern Queens. And I've been in the legislature for about 12 years now. I represent parts of Flushing, Fresh Meadows, and Oakland Gardens. And I have to just shout out St. John's. They're playing tonight in the NCAA tournament, and we wish them all the best.
Hi, yes, this is Andrew Tien. I am head of external affairs and strategic partnerships at Pursuit. We are a Queens-based nonprofit focused on economic transformation for New Yorkers most in need.
Okay, so for our listeners, I'd like to start off by breaking down the Good Jobs Guarantee Act. So, Assemblywoman Rosick, why don't you start off and explain how this bill would be benefiting New Yorkers throughout the state? What would happen if this passes into law?
Well, I'm really excited to talk about the Good Jobs Guaranteed Act because this bill really has the potential to transform the way we think about workforce development in New York. This is something that has been deeply personal to me since I first started in the Assembly, and I chaired the subcommittee on emerging workforces. I've thought a lot about how workforce development works and how it doesn't work in New York. And I really think that this approach might be one way to do it, because right now the reality is that a lot of New Yorkers, especially those without a 4-year degree, are struggling to access stable, good-paying jobs. And the numbers bear that out. 60% of adults in New York don't have a bachelor's degree, and yet most high-paying jobs in New York still require one. We know that college costs continue to rise. Student debt is at a crisis level. The federal government is only making that worse. And that means that too many New Yorkers are left behind simply because they can't afford the traditional pathway. So this is an alternative. It creates a state-backed workforce training program that operates on an outcomes-based model. And what does that mean? That means that participants don't have to pay anything upfront to get trained. They only make payments if the program successfully helps them land a good paying job. And instead of taking on debt with no real guarantee of success, the responsibility falls on these programs to actually deliver results. So if a participant doesn't secure a good job, they owe nothing. And that's really I want to focus on this. This is like a major shift in how we invest in our workforce. It makes training programs accessible, accountable, and it gives people real opportunities to break into higher paying careers without the financial burden of a traditional education. Pursuit is actually one of those. So I don't know, Andrew, if you want to tell folks at home a little bit more about Pursuit. I've known Pursuit since I first got elected. The two co-founders grew up in the same parts of Queens as I did. We all have very similar stories, but we're all just Queens kids trying to leave our communities greater than we found it. And that's why I connected really well and want to make sure that we get this done this year.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Yes, sharing a little bit more about Pursuit. We are Queens-based, Queens kids, started over a decade ago, and we are a nonprofit focused on economic transformation for New Yorkers most in need. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but we are a case study of and an example of the one of many organizations across the state that will be able to scale our impact in the communities we serve if the Good Jobs Guarantee Act is passed. And just to give you a sense of that impact in some numbers, over the past 10 years, Pursuit has helped over 1,000 New Yorkers based on the Good Jobs Guarantee Act model. These residents are 100% from low-income communities, 63% without degree, majority BIPOC, 40% immigrant, 50% of them on public assistance. And when they started with us, their average salaries were about 17,000 before training, and then coming out, average salaries were 5 times more than at around 94,000. And for each fellow, a projected 2 million of lifetime earnings, um, and then just in terms of who we're serving, 1 billion across the total. And we're doing this through training them in software engineering by helping New Yorkers who haven't traditionally had access to this kind of career become leaders in tech. It's not only about getting the job, but staying in the job and having a career for a lifetime. I'll just mention a few more things and hand it back to the assembly member. In terms of the model, one, just making sure we start with reaching out to communities most in need, underserved populations, creating awareness of the tech career pathway and some sense of belief. Then there is intensive pre-job training to develop professional skills and technical skills. Social capital and network building so essential for underserved to stay in a career in a new sector. And then lastly, a 3-year support model where they are hired and we hope retained and advanced in that job with our employer partners to ensure on the job success and a career for a lifetime. And as the assembly member mentioned, from a financing and protections for the job seeker, no payment upfront. You pay it forward if you are securing a job at a certain income threshold. And in Pursuit's case, that's 85,000. And importantly, to call out no debt or loan obligation for the individual. The Pursuit and similar in the legislation, the training organization takes on the risk and raises investment from the private sector. And we have been fortunate to have 2 multi-year pilots where we were able to do that. So last thing I'll say is, this is really not, about one organization, but about statewide impact as we're dealing with uh, some unprecedented labor market disruption. So technology shifts, the political shifts, demographic shifts that are so important, and that each of us as residents, but communities and the state are dealing with. The Good Jobs Guarantee Act provides a critical lifeline and a sustainable one for organizations who are really focused on job outcomes for New Yorkers.
Okay, great. I wanted to highlight the disparity in income unemployment rates between the different demographics we represent as a caucus and we fight for as a caucus. And so, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the unemployment rate for New York's black population in 2024 was at 7.9%, while the Hispanic population was at 6. While these are arguably lower stats for New York's unemployment overall, the disparity in these numbers compared to the white unemployment rate is a little shocking here. So only 3.4% of individuals facing unemployment. So how would the Good Jobs Guarantee Act help uplift these marginalized groups that are two times more likely to be struck out without a job?
So that's a great question. We, as policymakers, know that unemployment and economic mobility are deeply tied to education. And when we look at those numbers in conjunction with what you just mentioned, Member Raga, right, the disparities are striking. So, according to the Center for Urban Future, 69% of white residents in New York hold a bachelor's degree or higher. When we look at Black and Latino residents, those numbers drop significantly to 30 and 24%, respectively. There's a huge gap, and these gaps don't just reflect differences in education, they directly impact employment, income levels, and long term economic security. That's why I think the Good Jobs Guarantee Act is a way to address these disparities. One, it unlocks $1 billion in funding for high impact organizations that specialize in training and placing underserved populations specifically into high paying jobs. And we're targeting those lower income, middle income New Yorkers who are just left behind by the system. And that means direct investment in those communities that have been historically excluded. Two, it scales quality alternative training pathways for non-degree learners. So we're ensuring that people who don't have college degrees will still have access to meaningful career advancement. We don't do that statewide at all. And then three, it removes financial barriers to participation. So one of the biggest obstacles for low-income New Yorkers is that cost of education and job training. The bill that we've been working on for a while now guarantees that participants don't pay a cent upfront and will only contribute if they secure a job that pays well. If they don't, again, they don't know anything. So when we talk about uplifting marginalized communities, this is what it looks like. Actually creating pathways into high wage jobs, actually making career training accessible to all, and then actually holding systems accountable for real outcomes. And again, we have not done this in any real credible way in the state of New York. And we really should be looking at the way that this works statewide.
And I would just add to what the Assembly member is saying with a little bit of context from the Pursuit experience. Um, as we all know, and I mentioned, technology shifts, the rise of generative AI is leading to a disruption that we have not experienced as communities, state, country, and potentially world. And we at Pursuit just launched our AI native pilot a few days ago. Um, and I bring that up as an example, one, to really show that having access to this kind of funding as an organization allows us to respond quickly to the need to make sure we are not leaving New Yorkers behind. That's especially true, I think, in this AI moment, that we are actively allowing New Yorkers with the most potential, but maybe not the most access, to participate in the economy of the future. So this is an ongoing struggle for all training organizations to be able to react quickly, and because they are constrained by the current funding, and having access to the funding available under the Good Jobs Guarantee Act model and uh, will make a huge difference in addressing that need.
Okay, wonderful. No, thanks for shedding light on a lot of those points. Now I want to close out with for our listeners to see what's happening across the state. If the Good Jobs Guarantee Act passes, how do you guys foresee this initiative being implemented in New York State? And what would be the next step for legislators, our community, stakeholders, to fight against income inequality in New York?
So we would love it if stakeholders, advocates, other members who are interested reach out to us directly and just say, how can we help? How can we get involved? It does take a coalition to get things done in Albany. But if the bill passes, we're gonna see a major shift in how workforce training actually is delivered across the state. First, it'll establish a partnership under the Empire State Development Corporation to oversee and fund workforce training providers. These providers, like Pursuit, but again, there are many good organizations across the state doing this. We'll have to show that they can successfully place participants into good paying jobs before they receive funding. And then we'll actually be investing in programs that deliver results. Once those programs are up and running, and these workforce development trainings are happening, New Yorkers will have access to a lot more opportunities in industries that are growing and hiring. We've seen that in cities across upstate New York, but that's certainly true in the city of New York as well. And because it's a public-private partnership, businesses will be directly involved in shaping these programs, making sure that workers are gaining the skills that employers are looking for and that they actually need. So that's why I'm really excited about this, because we can transform communities across the state. And here's the bottom line. If we want to create real lasting economic opportunity in New York, we have to rethink the way that we've been investing in our workforce, and we have to be bringing those who need it most along the way. And this bill does that. So I'm really excited about it. Again, Andrew and Pursuit are deeply a part of the coalition, but we're looking to broaden it as well. So please get involved and reach out to us.
Great, wonderful. Andrew, any last points to leave off our listeners with?
We are so grateful for the Assembly member Rosick for her leadership and support and remembering her Queens kid history and trajectory, knowing what that will mean to so many communities across the state. And yes, looking forward to connecting with members and their organizations and in their districts about how they can take advantage of the Good Jobs Guarantee Act.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the BPHA Caucus podcast. Thank you for tuning in as we continue the conversation on the policies and issues that impact our communities, not just locally, across the state of New York, and how New York keeps continuing to lead the way on a lot of these policies across the country. So stay connected with the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus by following us on social media and visiting our website for updates on our legislative work and upcoming events. So if you found today's discussion valuable, be sure to share this episode, subscribe. Let's do this together. So until next time, let's keep pushing for progress and equity for all New Yorkers. Thanks for listening. Have a good rest of the week, guys.